Good afternoon and welcome to Parkinson's TV. Thank you so much for joining us. This is our first episode of Parkinson's TV, which is a show dedicated to answering all of your questions about Parkinson's disease. So questions like, how important is exercise for people with Parkinson's? Is there one right kind of exercise for people with Parkinson's? Or how come I can get on a bike and I can do fine on my bicycle, but I have trouble walking with Parkinson's? So we hope to answer all of those questions and more today during this, our first episode. I have the pleasure of being joined by our esteemed guests, so I want to welcome each of them. Welcome to Richard Simoni. It's great to have you here today. You found out you have Parkinson's in 2010.
Yes, I did.
And you've been a patient advocate ever since.
Absolutely.
So we're looking forward to hearing your stories, and particularly about exercise and what that's meant to you.
Love to share.
And Estelle Gallo, you're a physical therapist since 2001, and you're working at New York University.
Yes.
Wonderful. And specialized in movement disorders and Parkinson's disease.
Yes, that's correct.
Fantastic. We can't wait to hear your expertise on what we should be doing.
Thank you.
And to my right, our esteemed guest from the Netherlands, Dr. Bas Bloem from Radboud University in the Netherlands, professor and neurologist there, and the founder of ParkinsonNet. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're more than welcome, and excited that ParkinsonTV is now here in the United States.
We're so thrilled. We'll hope it'll be as much of a success here as it has been in the Netherlands.
Wonderful.
So I can't wait to learn more about exercise from each of you. And you as a viewer are also able to participate. So please send in your questions. And at the end of this episode, we'll be taking some of your questions that have been sent in and answering those with our panelists. All right, so Richard, I want to start with you. And a simple question, but what does exercise mean to you and how has that evolved?
It means quite a bit. It means that I can get up in the morning and I'm upright. It means that I can get to the club and manage a routine. It means that I have a measure of whether my meds are working or not. It means that for one more day at least, I'm winning, or not winning, but holding my own in the struggle with the unwanted guest that's in my life. And on a good day, it means that I can beat another player who's 20 years younger than I in a game of racquetball and still have enough energy to go home and chase my wife around the house.
That's pretty impressive. That's quite a feat. Have you always been involved in exercise and sports, or is this something that has evolved with your Parkinson's?
I got involved with exercise early in my life when I was in high school. I wanted to fit in, I wanted to make friends, and I figured out sports was a good way to do that. But I had no skills. So that meant that I had to work hard and exercise even outside of this particular sports, and even during the summers and off seasons and so forth, just to keep up, not because I wanted to be an all-star.
So you were practicing for practice?
Yes, yes.
Wow.
Then as things go, when you get busy in college and you starting a career and starting a family, you're just tired at the end of the day, it seems, and it's hard to dig into exercise. But then as that gets more stable, I think in my life around the 80s, I started to take jogging seriously, if nothing else. You could do that on business trips. You could just go off and run anywhere. Didn't need a partner or anything.
Yeah.
And then in the late 80s, I picked up racquetball. And racquetball is what I focus on the most right now.
So how often are you playing racquetball? How often are you exercising?
Well, I play racquetball at least 3 days a week for about an hour and a half. I try to do other exercises as well. I do some stretching for Parkinson's so that I'll be upright and straight. I exercise my voice, which is very necessary as well, but people don't think about that as much. I try to do that every day if I can. And I do a little light weightlifting. And I also exercise my brain in a different way. I do puzzles every day.
Great.
So.
Terrific. So, Estelle, we've hit on a lot of exercises. It sounds like, Richard, you're sort of doing all of them. But Estelle, from a physiotherapist perspective, what does exercise mean for Parkinson's, and what should people be doing?
That's a big question, and indeed, I think it's interesting when people ask about exercise, but we can differentiate between exercise and activity, and I think the most important is for people to be as active and as possible, It can be very simple, as simply as walking, going up and down the stairs. And I think that your example of playing racquetball is a great activity, doing sports-like type of activity. I think it's a very therapeutic and enjoyable activity that's perfect for Parkinson's disease, because we found that the type of exercise that can be very beneficial, especially in the early stages, are probably like agility type of activities to really diversify and keep the movement patterns that you have available as rich as possible. And probably the fact that you've been active all your life pretty much, and especially engaged in sports, probably helped you to, stay active even though you do have Parkinson's disease and not suffering too much from the motor symptoms, But indeed, so trying to stay as active as possible, and engaging in sports-like activities, but then also identifying what is it that you're having difficulty with. And you mentioned stretching, and indeed we know with Parkinson's disease, as the condition might be progressing, you might start to be more flexed, so it's important to engage in some type of stretching activities as well.
So you mentioned the flexion that can sometimes come with Parkinson's.
Yes.
What other types of exercise problems or movement problems do you commonly see?
So, as the disease progresses, some of the common symptoms we may see is the slowness of the movement and also having smaller movement. And also we might start to see more balance issues. So that's something that sometimes people don't talk too much about, because when people think exercise, they see stretching and strengthening, and that's why we see the weights here, But indeed, the big impairments that needs to be addressed with exercise is balance, to try to enable our patients to remain as balanced and as steady as long as possible. So that's, yes, something to address as well.
And I think one thing that often comes up, people talk about movement in Parkinson's, but there's also, there's the issue of extra movement. So some people say, well, I have these extra unwanted movements. What is that? Does that count as exercise if they're moving a lot, extra? Can you talk about that a bit?
No, I wish that were the case. So these involuntary movements are side effects to the dopaminergic medication. They, of course, help to reduce the slowness and the stiffness of Parkinson's. But over time, typically after several years of levodopa use, it starts to exceed its goals and make people hyperkinetic. And even though it consumes energy and people actually will lose weight because of these movements, I wouldn't say it counts as exercise. And you really need to do, to my mind, an aerobic workout, bring up your heart rate and do something extra in addition to just sitting in your chair and letting the movements do their job.
Okay, so that time with those extra movements, with those dyskinesias, you can't count that into your exercise goals?
No.
Okay, that's good to know, because I've had people that say, well, I'm moving all this extra, does that count?
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. And so what's the difference between, Estelle, I'll ask you this, what's the difference between exercise at home versus going to see a physiotherapist or exercising at a gym? Is there benefit to each of those? What would someone learn differently if they went to see a PT?
So, look, I think that it's, being a PT, I think everybody benefits from physical therapy. That's my bias, I think we'll save everyone. No, but going to see a PT, I think it's important because we know that the motor symptoms are going to happen. We know that there's going to be some motor deficits. So it's good from the beginning, as early as possible, to go see a physical therapist, to just get tested, to see, check your balance, check your strength, check your flexibility, to make sure, do you have any kind of impairments, and do you have any complaints of functional difficulties? If nothing is present, at least we do have baseline data available to keep track of the progress, but start, teaching exercises to prevent the progression of those motor symptoms, making sure that the patient starts stretching early on to make sure they stay as erect as possible, to start teaching some general strengthening exercises, and also start educating on some general aerobic exercise. So just target a little bit everything. But the same way we would need to, all of us would need to do some general exercises to stay healthy, because our body is a simple machine that, Parkinson's or no Parkinson's, we have to use it. If you don't use it, you lose it. So that's applicable for all of us, and even more so for patients who may have Parkinson's. And throughout, I think a physical therapist can help to identify the specific impairments and also some functional limitations that can start to come up to really help the patient then tap into their movement. Because as the disease progresses, it's not like someone is suddenly becoming paralyzed. It's, you know, it's not like they lose the ability to move, but we can teach them how to tap into their movement. So teaching them movement strategies on how to have access to those movements that they feel it's so hard for them. Because then it's teaching them new movement strategies, and that requires some training and some education and some learning, which really requires some time and expertise as well from trained specialists.
I think that's such a great point, because sometimes people think about, oh, I'll go for physical therapy for a one-time deal, I'll learn something, and then I'm done.
It is a continuous intermittent relationship. It's an on-off relationship where you learn something, you take it home with you, because at least now at home you know what you need to do. If people like to go to the gym, they can go to the gym, but I don't think the gym is the answer for everyone. Not everybody needs to go to the gym to exercise. Exercise can take so many shape and form, and I think that's what can be also overwhelming for patients with Parkinson's disease is, what should I be doing? What is the right exercise? And I think there are many right answers, and I think you need to find what works for you. And it seems that you found what works for you, and I would not change your routine. If racquetball, that's what you do, and you keep it up, it's a great exercise. But it's just finding what works for each of us.
That's fantastic. And Bas, I guess I'll throw that to you in the research context. So patients often ask, what's the right exercise? Is there a right exercise from a literature perspective?
No, there's no recommended specific exercise. So a couple of things. So do it regularly. I think if you look at exercise as a drug, if it had to be FDA approved, we needed to know about the dose, about the efficacy, and about the side effects. We know about the efficacy. Exercise works like a drug in people with Parkinson's disease. It helps to suppress the motor symptoms. We think it's also good for some of the so-called non-motor symptoms. It may improve sleep, it may improve fatigue, it may improve your bone strength, it may improve your cardiovascular fitness, the condition of your heart. So there are motor and non-motor effects. What about the dose? We don't really know. The general guidelines for healthy living, regardless of whether you have Parkinson's, is 3 times a week, 45 minutes, at about 70% of your maximum cardiac output, the maximum that your heart can take. That typically means you can still speak to another person. You might be sort of a little bit, but you can still speak. Do that 3 times a week. One lesson that I learned from Professor Nir Giladi in Israel is he tells his patients, do something every day. Because if you have to do something 3 times a week, there's always tomorrow. If you have to do it every day, there's no ifs, ands, or buts. You have to do it every day. So we don't know exactly about the dose, but at least 3 times a week, I tell my patients, try it every day. And then there's the issue of safety and security, which is interesting because theoretically, people might begin to fall. If you're sitting on the sofa, you're safe. If you tell people to exercise more, a potential side effect could be stumbling and falling, and that's where I really value the expertise of a physio who can not only make a tailor-made program that you like, but also look at safety issues.
So Estelle, do we wait until someone falls before we send them to you? Do we send them to you? When's the right time to send someone?
For me, it's as soon as the patient is ready to deal with a physical therapist, because I think, and maybe Richard can answer this, but for me, once you've initially diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, that might be a lot to process. It's not the best news to receive. It's very overwhelming. And then the physician is saying, well, go see PT, and they might not be ready. But as soon as someone is ready to see a physical therapist, I think it's important to start this project, to plant the seed of physical activity. Especially sometimes we're not necessarily very active, and the passive resistance is a bit of laziness, and we don't necessarily want to do anything. So to plant that seed and to give that support and the information, and also demystify the exercise, because I think for a lot of people it's intimidating. I need to go to the gym. I hate going to the gym. Those people, blah, 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 the smell, it's horrible. And to just tell people just walking and stairs, simple things can be sufficient to begin with, because you don't want to discourage people. You're better off doing less, but doing it than aiming at the stars and doing nothing. So simple sometimes is better than, simple and less and doing it than aiming at more and not doing anything. but I don't know what
If I
you
could
have to
add
say.
in- If I
Yeah,
could
of
add a
course.
comment. Obviously, there's a period after you're diagnosed where you don't know what's what, and you have to learn. Being an engineer and self-driven, I just dug right in as soon as I heard about it. But a physical therapist was available to me through the institute that I was going to. So I thought establishing a baseline while I was still early in the disease was kind of an important thing for me. The second thing, and different strokes for different people, but one of the aspects of going to a club is that you might have, and playing a team sport or a two-person sport, it's an incentive to get up. You have a regular match on Thursdays with John, and it becomes a regular thing, and you only want to call when there's an exception as opposed to setting one up.
Peer pressure.
Yeah.
Right. The other thing is, even if I'm not talking to the people that I'm in the club with or the gym, I feel it's important to have social contact with people and not to find yourself down in the dumps sitting at home and the exercise program doing those. Now, that doesn't mean you can't still be very active and other people maybe can self-motivate themselves and they go out and run and so on.
Yeah.
And are the people that you're working out with, are they other individuals who have Parkinson's disease, or are they?
Some are and some aren't.
That's great.
In fact, quite frankly, one of my racquetball partners, I met through my advocacy, and he didn't play racquetball before, and I sort of taught him because I wanted someone to play with. He's also a lot younger than I am, so it's a good challenge for me. And he's very athletic anyway. So, but other times I play with people that don't even know I have Parkinson's disease. They just think I'm not as good a player as the next guy, or I missed that shot for whatever reason you miss a shot, not because my drugs weren't working well that day, and because I had Parkinson's disease. Of course, it kind of which is it?
How does it make you feel to be able to get out there and do that and not have to have Parkinson's be necessarily part of the identity or part of the picture when you do that? How does it make you feel that you can go out and play racquetball and someone might not know that you have Parkinson's?
It's a plus. People don't come up to me and say, "Hey, do you have Parkinson's disease?" Because it seems like you can't hit the ball very well. That discussion doesn't happen very often. If it's in a group that I meet with regularly, I may mention that I have Parkinson's disease, not because anything that I want. I'm not asking for points in the match. And sometimes I'll use it even as a joke. If I'm playing with a partner and we're four people in the court and I miss a shot, I'll say, "Well, I was just Parkinson's." so I use it all different ways.
That's great. I feel like there should be a whole episode on humor and Parkinson's, right? That's a whole other topic.
I'm a strong believer in humor as a way to fight disease. Yeah.
So, Estelle, not everyone is able to exercise, or at least that's what they tell us. So how can you still get enough exercise? How can you motivate someone who says, "I can't" or "I won't"? Where do you start?
So, I think everybody can exercise. It's just a matter of defining what do you mean by exercise. So that's what I mentioned earlier. I think you can replace exercise with activity, and to really try to find what can engage someone to be moving. And sometimes just the best exercise will be the activity that you'll be doing, and simple walking can just be somewhere where you start. It's trying to really work with the person and trying to engage them as much as possible to see what is it and what are the barriers, if it's just motivation, and helping them to plant the seed of, this habit of going for a walk or doing a little something, or joining, a support group to first talk about it, to, whatever can help you to break those barriers, identifying why don't you exercise, or why aren't you doing the activity that you should try to be doing? What is it that's getting in your way? And to really problem solve with the patient and their caregivers. What can we do to help?
So I love that you brought up the caregivers, because I think often that's, we sort of forget,
Sure,
but what's the role of the caregiver in exercise? And I'd love for you to weigh in on that, Richard, too.
Yeah.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, if my wife comes up and says, "Let's go for a walk," I stop what I'm doing, I get up and go for a walk. I think it's important for her to go for a walk as well. And she does exercise a lot more now than I do. And she even told me last night, we were discussing that a little bit, she feels that she gets an endorphin swing from her exercises, which is pretty good. And she's hooked on exercise now. If she doesn't exercise 6 days a week, she feels like she's got to get in the next day. You know, even if it's Sunday, she'll go and exercise now. So.
That's right.
But yeah, the caregivers can be someone to help, you know, motivate the person. You know, the idea we're here to help, and what can we do? Trying to tell them, look, this is good for you, so we have to find a way for you to do it, you know. But indeed, you can't force anyone. It's really working with that person. And if there is a will and finding that will, there should be a way to do it. And again, sometimes for those people who have really low motivation, it's trying to keep it as simple as possible and the less intimidating as possible, so people are not too scared.
So we're talking about, you know, all these different ways to get people exercise and convince people to exercise, but Bas, are we, as neurologists, are we just sort of like every other doctor out there saying it's important to exercise because it's important to exercise, or is there some actual reason in Parkinson's specifically that exercise is doing something? Is this changing the brain? What's it doing?
So there's at least 3 reasons why people with Parkinson's should exercise. One is we're just general human beings. Exercise, we know, prevents development of dementia. It's good for your heart. It develops osteoporosis less rapidly. So there's all the generic reasons to exercise. Now you've got Parkinson's to boot. Parkinson's, and this is good research, suppresses the motor symptoms. It works like a drug. We think it's good for the non-motor symptoms, as I pointed out earlier. And there's really cool and exciting work in mice. And mice are not human beings. But you can induce Parkinsonism in a mouse. And if you then divide the mice into 2 groups, one is sitting in the corner of the cage doing nothing. The other mice are forced to run on a treadmill every day. 2 things happen. One is the mice that exercise every day look way better than the Parkinsonian mice who sit in the corner. If you then kill the mice and look at the brains, lo and behold, the exercising mice are sprouting new axons in their brain. The terminals that release dopamine are becoming more sensitive, and anti-dopamine systems are tuned down. So this creates hope that perhaps exercise not only works as a drug to reduce symptoms, it could potentially slow down the progression of the disease. Now, we've had earlier examples where positive results in mice were not replicated in humans. If you look into my heart, I'm convinced that exercise might be the intervention, helps to slow down progression of the disease. And one of the key things we talked about, motivation. I've got a number of tricks up my sleeve. One of them is to educate patients. If you know it works like a drug, if you know it might slow down the progression, get out there and do it.
Right, because we're always looking for what's that pill that's going to slow this down. And we don't have a pill that does that yet, but this seems like it might. And I think there's some early data coming out when we look at sort of big epidemiologic studies, big studies of swaths of patients sort of looking over time, right, that sort of some patients kind of progress like this and some patients progress like this. And what's the difference between those people that sort of have a really slow progression of their Parkinson's and a really rapid progression? And it seems like exercise may kind of differentiate them a bit, but again, lots more that needs to be done.
Yeah, but it's probably over a lifetime, unfortunately, and you can't go back and undo that you didn't exercise. I mean, you can commit to exercise now.
Right.
Yeah, and that's the key thing. So you're absolutely right. It might be that exercise prevents future development of Parkinson's, but now you have the disease. And the key thing is we all feel, and the evidence is beginning to grow, that exercise, when you have Parkinson's, might slow down the progression of the disease that you already have.
Yeah.
And that's why really, like, I think the sooner we have our patients starting to exercise, the better, you know, and it's so important because especially in early stages, in our early diagnosis, it might still be easy to move, so they might be more inclined to do the exercises, but if once you start to be told you need to exercise, but it's a lot harder for you to move, who likes to do something that's so hard to do, and it's going to be even harder to be compliant, you know? So the sooner you start, I think the better off, you know, our patients will be.
Fantastic. So, Richard, I want to switch gears a little bit. How does exercise affect your medication and vice versa? Do you notice any relationship?
That's a good question, and I address it the other way around. Exercise lets me know that my medications is working.
That's a fair point.
And there are days when I get in the racquetball court and we're between points, not during the active, where I'm waiting for the serve, and I'll have a tremor. But if I exercise regularly, that only occurs, and I'm on the medications properly, that only occurs rarely. When I'm not getting enough sleep, by the way, we didn't mention how important sleep is. I've decided that exercise is very important in my life, but I need sleep. So if I'm going to trade off sleep, that's the only thing I'll trade off exercise for is sleep. And I'll promise to make it up, but that's hard to do.
That seems fair. Do we have neurologist approval for trading off sleep and
Well,
exercise?
we can do a whole separate episode on sleep, and I think sleep is critical. But one of the key things is insomnia or poor sleep quality is a key feature of Parkinson's. And one of the things where exercise might help is actually to improve your nighttime sleep. Don't exercise just before you go to sleep, but daytime exercise may well help to improve your nighttime sleep quality.
But getting back to your question, it's kind of interesting how exercise let me know that there was something going on with my body that wasn't right.
So was that how you started first
Yes, it was
noticing?
about 18 months prior to being actually diagnosed that I started to see a neurologist about what's going on with my body, because the sports medicine doctor said there's nothing physically wrong with my body. It has to do something, some other disease, and you should see a neurologist. So exercise pointed out that I had the disease, and then after I knew I had the disease and I started taking the medication properly, I can tell that I'm doing the right thing. That's how I think the medication works with my exercise.
That's really nice. It was sort of the red flag for you, but also as one of your markers
Right.
along the way.
Right.
Great. So Estelle, how can we help patients to learn how to move better at home? So, if someone's able to get to the gym, they're able to participate in racquetball and do all these kind of things,
Yeah, no.
that's fantastic. But sometimes we have patients who really struggle with just navigating their homes and moving around. And so how do you sort of intervene at that point? And can you get someone who's struggling at home just to move around to then be able to exercise too?
No, I think we really can get almost everyone to exercise. There is an exercise for everybody out there. There is a solution to the problem. But indeed, here when you're starting to deal with our patients really having difficulty moving and really starting to lose their balance a lot more, or having difficulty accessing their movement, that's when I think physical therapy can really be helpful to first learn new strategies in the clinic, knowing how they can talk to themselves, to give themselves the right cue to be able to access the movement, just thinking, take a big step or a high step to help them, they will take longer steps, or if it's time to turn and they're really frozen, to stop and, take high steps to do the turning. But it's helping them finding those strategies, and they are out there. And indeed, I use the analogy of a plane, and between the automatic pilot fading away, and to really for them it's time to put back the pilot into the plane, and they need to, at that point maybe they won't be able to do all tasks, but at least they can do one thing at a time. And understanding their limits is the best way to then work with your limits and to push those limits. But there is a lot of education and showing them how they can still move, even just using visual cues, aiming at a visual target to help them tap into their walking and be able to take the right steps that they need to take to be able to walk inside their house or outside. So there are strategies out there. Also, auditory cues can really help them. That's why, in wellness program, we can recommend, dancing, having a music, a tempo can really help to, but for everyone, how many people listen to some music at the gym? It's kind of give you a pace. Well, same principle here for someone who has Parkinson's disease and struggle with the timing of their movement. Having like a little bit of a pace, a tempo in their head can really help them to access their movement. So it's really working with the patient to identify the strategies that are going to work for them, and also educating the caregivers for sure to help them, hey, this is what you need to do, you know. Stop, reset, reboot, and start again, you know.
So we can find an exercise for everyone. We can get them.
There is an exercise there is really an exercise for everyone, because even if somebody is really unsafe, there's some exercise someone can do sitting, but there are strategies out there to optimize somebody's safety so they can exercise. But indeed, it probably requires the recommendation of an expert in that domain, and not just randomly doing some weird exercises, because now we're really concerned about the safety. So it's this balance of trying to keep someone active and also safe at the same time. But exercise will be the way to keep them safe too. So
Perfect. So viewers, if you're sitting there and thinking, yeah, but I can't, and there's an excuse, Estelle says no. So one more question is there such a thing as too much exercise? Do you think, or is there a wrong exercise?
Well, I don't think there's a wrong exercise, but too much exercise could potentially be harmful. All I know is anecdotes. There was a patient in the United Kingdom who I think ran a marathon every day to raise money for Parkinson's, and he got worse and actually never got back to the same level. So this is an anecdote. It's a single observation, and it doesn't prove anything. But I think too much exercise can be harmful. Like I said, do a reasonable amount of exercise, but do it on a regular basis. That is really key. What people can feel is what I frequently hear, is people feel better when they are exercising. We have a patient in the Netherlands who can barely walk, but he feels freed from Parkinson's when he's running, and he's running marathons. Immediately after the exercise, you've basically consumed a lot of your dopamine. He may feel a little bit worse. That doesn't mean his Parkinson's has worsened, on the contrary. So feeling a little bit worse immediately after exercise is nothing to worry about. We talked about the relation between medication and exercise. I often tell my patients, just prior to exercise, don't be afraid to take a little bit of extra medication that allows you to participate in exercise. If I exercise, my brain squeezes out more dopamine, so why shouldn't you? So don't stick to a rigid regime of medication. Take a little bit of extra pills prior to the medication. If you feel a bit fatigued afterwards, not to worry.
And so in the spirit of practicing what we preach, so we know, Richard, that you're doing racquetball, you're doing other sports and activities. What else are you doing to sort of keep yourself active?
Well, active, well, there's always work to do around the house. There's something broke all the time. And I have 4 children, and they have children as well. And with that number of people, there's always somebody that needs help from Papa. So I do those other activities.
Can you engage the grandkids in exercise?
They're yes and no. They're getting to be teenagers, so they're either still active in sports or they're not. And there's not much you can do with motivating them to do something, unfortunately. They're in their own space.
I should point out that the dyskinesias don't count as exercise. Household work does count as exercise. So doing vacuum cleaning, gardening, putting a painting on the wall counts as exercise. That does work.
All right, that's
And an interesting thing you made me remember. One of the other symptoms I had when I didn't know I had Parkinson's disease was I wasn't able to paint. Not artist painting, but painting a room.
Right, exactly.
I couldn't get the straight edge anymore. My hand was, and I didn't know that was Parkinson at the time. So I became left-handed.
Oh, really?
And it was very quickly I could learn how to paint with the left hand. So now the plus is, with a good medication, I can paint with both hands.
You're twice as effective.
And I go really fast.
I'm hiring you to paint the next room.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
great. Bas, what about you? In all of the spirit of sort of telling everyone that they need to be exercising, are you taking that to heart?
No, practice what you preach. I used to be a professional or semi-professional volleyball player, but those days are long gone now. I still play a little bit of volleyball, and I go to the gym regularly, and I cycle. If I may, cycling, there's not an ideal intervention, but cycling is a very attractive intervention for people with Parkinson's. And one of the reasons I've begun to pick up cycling is we have 2 events in the Netherlands. And one is called Bike for Parkinson, where we cycle in teams of a patient and a doctor, or a patient and a physio, always in duos. And we cycle in the Dutch hills, Holland is flat as a pancake, except for the Dutch mountains in the south, very steep hills, and it's a wonderful event always. People with Parkinson's who are unable to walk, this is again good science, can still ride a bicycle. And talking about taking exercise to the patient's home, using a stationary bicycle and exercise at home could be an effective way of bringing exercise to the patient's home, but it should be attractive. So what we've just recently begun to do, we're doing a very cool trial now where we are gamifying the exercise. So we have an iPad where you have fans, your spouse, who says, get off the couch, go on your bicycle and exercise. When you do the exercise on the bicycle, it is actually a game. You can cycle with other patients, or you can do Pac-Man. Remember the old 80s video game? And you cycle and you think, oh, I killed 20 monsters, but in fact you've exercised for 45 minutes at 70% cardiac output. And then you sit on the sofa and ping, the same app on your iPad will tell you the wife has already begun to wash the dishes. So she rewards you for the exercise. And those clever tricks, we think, might improve compliance with exercise.
That's brilliant. And one of the things that I found sometimes with my patients is, you know, they might say, no, I really like to watch TV though. They don't really like to exercise. And I say, that's great. You can only watch your show, whatever that show is. I don't care if it's NCIS or if it's Housewives or whatever it is that you love. Watch the show when you're biking or watch the show when you're on the treadmill or something like that. Sort of let that be a reward. So that's wonderful. I'm excited for those results.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Estelle, any last final thoughts?
No, I think the bike is a very good idea because it is very safe for patients to do, especially a stationary bike. But indeed, you know, it is, you know, I think exercise activity, the idea is to be active, to use your body, to move it, to engage it in movements. And if you have difficulty, the sooner you start, the better off you'll be. And if you have difficulties in doing that, is reaching out to your healthcare team to see how we can best help you. There are different strategies. There are so many strategies out there. So it's finding what works best for you. Some people it's going to be in group. Some people are going to be, I'm too shy, I want to be on my own, you know. So some people have strong self-discipline. Some people have no self-discipline. So, and it's really finding what works for you.
And if I can add just one little thing.
Sure.
We did another trial in the Netherlands, which was called the ParkFit study. And the intervention was actually relatively simple. For example, don't take the elevator, but take the stairs. Don't do your shopping with your car, but take a walk. Or if you have a bicycle, take your bicycle to do the shopping. And just replacing all the simple things by exercise in that way is also very helpful. And it proved to be effective in our study.
It's tremendous. So each episode, we will answer some questions that have been asked by our viewers. So I'd like to ask my guests to answer some of these questions that have already been sent in today. One person asked, how do I find a sport that's suitable for me?
That's a good question. To that person, I would ask, have you ever played any kind of sport? Is there a sport that you've done in your younger days, you know, because that might be a good place to start and go back to that sport. After, if you've never played any sports and you want to engage in a sport, I'm not quite, you know, you can go to one of, YMCA or, you know, here in New York we have the Jewish Community Center and find what some sports could be available for you. You know, I know with Parkinson's disease, a lot of people talk about boxing, but I'm not sure that everybody feels about boxing. And sports, you know, something we didn't talk too much about, but dancing is a great activity. And I think for some people that's the best thing they can do. You know, they have support groups with such as Dance for PD, which can be a great activity. It's fun, you move, you have the tempo, and it's a social activity. So, yeah.
So how is that possible? As a neurologist, how is it possible that we have patients who they can't walk but they can dance, or they can't walk but they can get on a bike?
Yeah.
How does that work?
The honest answer is we don't completely understand, but there are some ideas. The part of the brain that's defective in people with Parkinson's disease, the so-called basal ganglia, is the part of the brain that makes movements automatic. Swinging your arms, blinking your eyes is something you don't think about. It's the brain doing that for you automatically. Walking is actually an automatic motor behavior. That's defective, but people with Parkinson's disease can still move if they consciously think about the movement. So anything that's internally driven, automatized, becomes more difficult. Anything that's externally driven can still be done. So that's the basis for a physiotherapy strategy called cueing, where you look at stripes on the floor and consciously step over them. Racquetball is perfect. The movement is driven by the ball that you see and you run after the ball. So that's externally driven. Boxing is the exact same thing. Listening to music and dancing, or dancing with a spouse and you follow the movements of your dance partner, is externally driven. So there's not a single exercise that's good, but all the movements that are externally driven are, and it's good, well explained by how the brain functions, are simply easier to do by people with Parkinson's.
And another viewer asked, I heard that if you exercise a lot, you need less medication. Is there truth to that?
I don't think anybody has proven it, but if exercise works like a drug to reduce symptoms, and if exercise maybe helps to slow the progression, the logical thing would be that people need less medication. Again, I don't think any trial has ever shown it. And you know, reducing the medication is not a goal in its own right. People shouldn't be too afraid of the medication. Just see it as a sort of a nice adverse effect, but it's not a goal in its own right. I think it will work that way, but it's not the key issue. The key issue is do it.
Perfect. So before we wrap up, Richard, any last thoughts to the viewer that's listening and thinking, I'm still not convinced about why exercise needs to be right for me? Why is it right for you?
I exercise to try to maintain the place that I'm at right now, because I know it's going to get worse. And I know as well in my mind, no studies, just my analytical mind, that exercise is healthy, and exercise is good for all of your body, including your brain. And I do believe there have been studies that state that exercise is good for the brain. I heard this from a researcher. So get out there and run or dance or box or whatever. Just walk. Whatever you can do it.
So you heard it from Richard. With that, we want to wrap up this episode on exercise. Thank you all so much for watching this, the first episode of Parkinson TV. We hope that you will join us for all the rest to come and send in your questions. And with that, thank you so much to Richard, to Estelle, to Bas, and thank you to all of our viewers. So thanks so much for watching, and we hope to see you again next time.